Hi there, welcome back to this sixth video of our CashCalc training series. This video is going to be focusing on those last remaining calculators that we've yet to cover off, primarily the IHT calculator, which is arguably our most popular and most used calculator, and also getting into the weeds of the risk profiles we have, both the standard ATRQ and the ethical ATRQ as well, and how you can adjust some of those, going back to that settings tab we went through all the way back in video one. Starting where we left off, when we've been covering off these calculators, there were a couple that I've missed off purposely because we've already kind of covered those off in previous videos. That's basic cash flow modeler and this Monte Carlo simulator. So just to quickly cover these off, just so you're aware of what they do, so you're not wondering why I have left them off. The basic cash flow modeler is exactly that. It's like a light version of the full-blooded cash flow modeler that we went through in video 3, I believe. So if you do want a light touch for a particular scenario, if you want a light touch cash flow that doesn't add all those layers of complexity and is all available in one place, and this is actually quite a useful tool to use. All you've got to do, very simple, pop in the total savings as of today, again the standard investment return rate and the inflation rate, and that will give you the real return, and then just add some simple incomes and expenses. So this client has a salary going in at 50,000 a year from the age today up until they retire, and there's expenses that are going to continue throughout the length of the forecast, 3,800 every month from today up until an end date of 99. And then it just gives me that nice little forecast, cash flow forecast, showing me as the client gets older, it gets up to the retirement age, and then what it looks like when those withdrawals start eating away at the capital, and then the deficit again at the very end, and then the year-on-year breakdown at the very bottom. So all available on one page, very simple. Create a report at the very end, but it doesn't give you any more than what the cash flow tool does, but sometimes less is more, and you might prefer this one at times. So that's why I didn't really focus too much on that. And also the Monte Carlo simulator, we pretty much went through that on the cash flow tool. This is the same tool that's baked into that cash flow model when you stress test it. So it doesn't really add any more options here. So again, just to quickly recap, you put the pot size in on the left, what the amount you want to ensure the pot size doesn't drop below, so in this case 0. My clients come out as a risk profile 4, so 4 long, so the asset allocations have pulled through. I want to project that over until the client's 99, 10,000 simulations, but then also bake in a couple of other little bits of logic. So I want to add fees in. So again, if you remember all the way back to the first video, I've showed you how to bake in kind of set charges to different risk profiles. So I can do that exactly here. The clients are 4, so I can click that button and my advisor fee can be popped in automatically to be considered. Also, there's going to be withdrawals from today all the way to the length of the forecast of about £3,000 a month, and also contributions initially up until that client's 68 until they retire. It just runs the Monte Carlo projection for me, the stochastic model. It shows with the asset allocation in mind, there's the 10,000 different permutations you could potentially experience, starting at the starting value of 500,000, gives you a high, mid, and low. And there's my threshold. Obviously, I don't want it to fall below 0. And it, more importantly than ever, it shows at 75, just over 75% of these simulations stayed above 0, which is obviously our target and our goal. So they are the two calculators we've kind of conveniently missed during this training series, just to cover those off very quickly. Also, whilst I'm on this screen, you've also got a specification sheet as well for every single calculator. So if you are wanting to use any of these calculators and wanted a bit more kind of meat on the bones in terms of the logic being used and even some of the maths, you've got all of those in here. So for example, if I wanted to look at that pension carry forward calculator, we went through these, all client facing as well, so it is all in layman's terms, so you can give these to clients, covers off what they are, the assumptions, and some of those kind of complicated tax and maths equations that are being used underneath. So the last calculator I wanted to cover off today is the IHT calculated inheritance tax planner. There are 2 ways of getting to this particular one, which we have kind of referred to a couple of times on these videos. You can either get to it from here, and it'll just load up a blank canvas, or and I can then start adding in all the necessary information. But given the IHT calculator is clearly going to need to know all the assets that I hold, well, CashCalc already knows that because I've sucked it in from a third party, or indeed I've kind of manually already put that in when I'm doing my cash flow. So if I click on the info tab instead over here, load that page up again. Again, all of my assets and my liabilities are all covered off in these little tabs. So I can click on that update calculator, and usually we push all that data into a cash flow, or you can push that into one of these other calculators that we've covered off. And probably the most important one to use is that inheritance tax planner, because it takes into account so many of these assets that I have. So I'm going to push all that data in there. I'm going to call this my IHT example. These are the assets I want to pull across to that calculator, including that home. There aren't any liabilities to pull across. And if I click on export, that will take me through to the IHT tool. But when it takes me there, it's pulled all of the information across, so it's no longer a blank canvas. Now, what I can do is start off with assumptions still, so I still need to tell the system when I assume these clients are going to die, for example. So we're just going to use the standard kind of government life expectancy rate. So I think for male it's 85, and then 87 for a female. So that's husband and wife. Does Mr. Baker have a previously deceased spouse? Same with Mrs. as well. So you can click on that and you can explain how much of their NRB remains, and equally is a transfer of RNRB not available. So there's a few extra bits of logic you can add. Does Mr. Baker have a spouse? Yes, he does. And after all liabilities and specific legacies have been paid, how much of the residual estate will be left to the surviving spouse? And we're going to set that at 100, and we can kind of lock that in. And that's the baseline assumptions we're going to be using. Now, in terms of the assets, again, as if by magic, they've all pulled across. So I've not got to spend time now adding them all in individually. All 6 have been added, and all of their assumed growth rates I've already plumbed in as well. If I click on add asset at any time, it will take me to a screen that allows me to type all the data in for each one. The same screen that I'll get if I just click on the edit button, which we'll do now. So if I just edit this one, this is the ISA. So it's not a blank canvas because obviously a lot of the data has been pulled through. So this is the name of the asset. Again, you can put whatever you like, what type of asset it is. So in this case, it's cash and investments. What's the current value of that asset? 75,000. Again, it knows that it's a jointly held asset between husband and wife, because again, that information is already stored in CashCalc, so I don't have to spend time popping all this in. The percentage of ownership is 50-50. The net return, again, is the one that I'm using back on the info tab, hence why that's been pulled across. And by default, it's going to suggest that for all of these assets, the IHT planning in place already, it's going to assume it's just to leave to residual estate. And your suggested IHT planning in place is to, again, leave to residual estate, so no change. But you can start messing around with this. You can say, well, actually, for this particular case, I'm going to suggest that the client does do something with this asset. Maybe for whatever reason, they've got so many pensions in place and various other incomes coming in, they don't actually need this ISA in retirement. So they're going to give that to maybe their children for a property, etc. Could be any number of different scenarios. But I'm going to suggest to use a pet. So I can click on that, and we're going to suggest we do that now. So I'm going to update the assets. So that's my planning suggestion for the ISA. And equally, the 40 grand premium bond, if we open this up, we'll do something different with this as well. We can, given that we've just been speaking about an EIS calculator, we can say, okay, we're going to be utilizing an EIS solution using that PBR relief, and we're going to suggest this client pushes that 40,000 into an EIS scheme instead, and I'm then going to update that asset. So that's the 2 bits of advice I'm giving this client now. So if you click on liabilities, these are all the liabilities currently held with the client. There aren't any. There's none being pulled across from the info tab. So if you did want to add a liability, you just need to say what it is. Maybe this is maybe this is the client's, or not home, maybe mortgage. Client's mortgage. What's the current liability? It's maybe 100,000 mortgage. Who owns it? Keith. It's actually a liability that's against one of the assets. So maybe it's the home, and it is a loan or mortgage. And we can say, look, they'll be paying that off over 10 years, and this is the interest rate currently sitting on that mortgage. So you can add any amount of liability in there, and that will be factored into the IHT calculations in the background. But I won't bother in this particular scenario. And the IHT planning, when you click on it, it gives you all the maths now, and it explains what the IHT position is now versus what it will be after the advice given. So at the moment, if the clients again die at those respective ages in 2049, the assets, the kind of the estate would be worth just shy of 3 million because of all of those pots of money and the pensions and the house, etc. 737,000 of that sits outside of the estate, which will then be passed across to Barbara, and she won't have to pay any IHT on that. But on her death, as you can see, there's an estate of 844,000, again because of the ISA, because of the home, because of the NS&I premium bonds. They're now collectively worth 844. So there's quite a whopping great charge of 337,000 to be paid on her death, given those assumptions. However, because we've now given the advice to start utilizing a pet and utilizing an EIS scheme after the advice now, the calculations change, and now suddenly there's an IHT to pay of 220 because only the house remains as part of the estate. and not the others. And when you click on, you could, by the way, you can adjust assumed death ages as well if you wanted to see what that looks like, very quickly altering the suggested death ages. But if you click on the asset breakdown, it gives you a breakdown of every single asset that we're looking at, what the IHT planning is in place. We could clearly leave in pension wrappers for the pensions, leave to residual estate for the house, but now we're going to utilise a pet and the EIS scheme, and that means that asset the amount liable to IHT on the second death is only the house, 550,000 and nothing on the other other pots. And finally, when you're ready to create a report, they'll all be automatically ticked. I'll just PDF this. So you get a nice little 8-page report, starting off with your logo, cover page, then a little introduction again, just explaining what the IHT report shows. There's the original assumptions we added on that first screen. There's all the assets we're including in this calculation. And again, looking at some of the advice we're suggesting using the PET and the EIS scheme, and the growth rates we're assuming as well. That's, again, a breakdown before any advice was given, and therefore the IHT to pay, the 337, and then before any advice again, there's all of the different assets, where they are, how much they're worth, 844. But then now, after the advice is given, the IHT to pay is significantly reduced because the assets now sit here, essentially outside of the estate, and the only one that sits in is that house. So that's the IHT calculator, and that is indeed all of the calculators on the system. So just wanted to finish up by talking a bit more about the risk profiling tool and the ESG questionnaire as well. Now, if you cast your mind back all the way to the first video, we spoke about the settings tab and all the different settings that appear in CashCalc that can alter certain aspects of the system. And investment proposition we very quickly flew through. So I just wanted to spend a bit more time on this because this feeds in quite nicely to the risk profiling tool. Now, by default, CashCalc uses the value, asset allocation and risk profiler. So when you come into this section of the system, if you click on import from EV, the foundation will be built for you to then spring into sending clients risk profiles and get them to fill those in. And it's going to be using the same logic as you see here. Now, everything here can be adjusted and you can build in your own logic, which we'll get into in a second. But ultimately, eValue have 5 risk profiles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can amend and adjust the name of that risk profile, the description of it that pulls through, the asset allocations that are being used, the historical growth rates. And each one of those risk profiles, you'll get 3 variable templates and you'll get 3 asset allocation templates. And the reason for that is because the investment term. The logic being that you got, in this case, is a risk profile 1. If you've got 2 clients that come out as a risk profile 1 out of 5, that's great. But if one of them's got 20 years to invest and the other one's only got 5, then although they're both risk profile 1, their asset allocation should be slightly different to one another, and therefore the growth rate should be different as well. So they do add that level of complexity in here. Now, these variable growth templates will impact when you select a pot in cash within the cash flow. When you project a pot forward, you can pick different variable growth rates, and we'll come back onto this shortly to show where that lives. And then also the Monte Carlo simulator, that will take different asset allocation models. So different parts of CashCalc will be sucking out this information. Now, they also live under here, the variable templates and asset allocation templates. So I can come on here and look at my one long template, view edit, and it shows me what the asset allocation is and all of the stats that are projecting on that basis. And the same with variable templates as well. So you can open up funds and benchmarks, open up the custom benchmarks, and there they are, one long. And that's again, that's a variable template that's being used to project forward. And again, you can adjust and save. But you can build your own. For whatever reason, I might not want to use these, and I just want to use a very simple asset allocation model, 20% equity, 40% equity, etc. So at the very bottom down here, you can add your own asset allocation, as I've done here, and I've just built my own, and exactly the same with variable templates. So when I come back to my risk profiles, if I scroll down to the bottom here, if I want the system to recognize different asset allocation models when it asks me and serves me up different options, I can set a different template. At the moment, these are automatically being selected because it's EV. But actually, no, if someone comes out as a risk profile 1, I want them to use my 20% equity asset allocation instead. So again, this is all very, very configurable. Don't think this is set in stone. You can very much take your own centralized investment process and your own opinions and ideas about this and bake in those instead. But I would recommend certainly sticking with the 1 to 5. You can add more risk profiles. You can make this go up to as many as you like, essentially, but that you will notice that it becomes very difficult to actually use the risk profiling tool, which we'll move on to now. So that's the investment proposition piece, and that allows you to kind of chop and change things happening behind the scenes for the risk profile. Now, if I come back to my clients, I've got Keith Baker, so I want him to fill in one of these risk profiles. So I can come to the ATRQ tab up here, and I can just send the questionnaire to him in the portal, and he can fill this out in without me. I can fill this in with him, though, so let's do that now. Complete for him or her, husband and wife, but I'm just going to do this for Keith. Questions load up. So these are the 15 questions that you've got in total. It's all pretty simple. Oh, wrong button. All pretty simple. I'm just going to pick the middle option for most of these just to quickly whiz through them. And you'll see there are basically 13 questions in total, but the final question down here is the investment term, which is going to basically dictate whether they get that short, medium, or long asset allocation. So my client is just going to consider themselves as a medium term. Now, these are some additional questions around capacity, floss, knowledge, and experience. And if the client answers yes to any one of them, or you answer yes to any one of them, it will expect you to add some extra notes to it. So I'll do that on a couple. And then finally, knowledge and experience, I'll just put no for those. And finish and review. And automatically the system kind of crunches the numbers and decides that that client is a 3 out of 5. There's the asset allocation that gets pulled through. There's the answers that the client's given us, and I can very quickly show the differences from what they gave me last time, if necessary. And then at the very end there, it's suggesting I move forward with a 3, but in this case, I'm going to suggest that client's, for whatever reason, I'm disagreeing with the results and thinking that client should be a 4 long, and then explain why I've changed it, and then save and proceed. Now, where that comes up, whenever you go into Cashflow, let's quickly dive into a Cashflow model. You probably remember this from my third video. If I come into this cash flow model here, if I come into my savings pots, actually, if I start off with assumptions, you can see if I pull the data across from that info tab, automatically it will select risk profile 4 for me in here. And equally, when I look at my savings pots, any single one of them, if I click on variable, I can select my my benchmarks here, my e-value benchmarks. And also under stress testing, if we go into Monte Carlo, if I just go and project one of these, you can see it also asks me for it here. And again, it's pulling that asset allocation model from that settings. So I can say my client is a 3, and there's automatically the 3 risk profiles, short, medium, and long. I can project on that. So that's where they appear. Now, in terms of the ethical ESG questionnaire, if I click on that one instead at the top here, same as before, I can send the reminder to the client to complete this online themselves on the portal, but I'm just going to complete this for Barbara instead. So let's just do that now. Knowledge and experience. So got a couple of questions. Do you have any experience with sustainable investing? No, she doesn't. Are sustainable investment types of particular interest to you? Yes, they are. Next. Sustainable engagement, are you passionate about or proactively engaged any of the following areas? So it's up to the client then to select the areas that they are particularly interested in, and any other further details, put that down there. Investment approach. I want to make a positive impact by investing in avoiding specific areas that support my views. And then finally, it's a way for you to then, the client to illustrate to you what means most to them. So be diversified without restrictions, be low cost, avoid controversial business practices, and they can kind of move these up in an order of priority. And then after that, they can add some extra comments, click on submit, and the system will work out the results and tell them that they are in shades of green. They're a dark green 5 for these reasons. So that's the ATRQ, that's the ethical questionnaire as well, and that's how the ATRQ can also be impacted by that settings tab and some of the logics you're moving around in the background. Thanks for listening.